hand you over to Sara.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. So I want to thank you so much for inviting me. I love Oban. I was telling Kirsty on the way here, it's a wee bit poignant because the last time that I was here with a group that included the wonderful Ian Lawson, who died just over a year ago, and we miss him all the time. But it's still absolutely lovely to be back, and it's lovely to be back with family. I think quite a lot of us have been on the same road for about the same length of time. You know, for me it's around 40 years. And for some people it's more, and for some it's a bit less.
We're struggling.
Okay, I don't have a very loud voice, so I will do my best.
You can stand at the top of the table.
Okay, what I will do is stand up. Is that okay? I don't want people to feel like I'm looking down, but it might make it easier to project. Okay, so I'm going to say something. I'm going to say a very short piece about what we're doing, why we're doing it. There's so much to say about restoring Scotland and about liberation that I could stand here all day and talk about it and not run out of things to say, things we never knew, even 3 or 4 years ago. But what I will say is that we are up against a state that has been known as perfidious Albion from before the Napoleonic Wars. In fact, my friend Alan was telling me from the time of the Crusades. It's never been any different. But we are in a situation now where, it's said that those who are honourable themselves do not expect dishonour from those they're dealing with. Those who would never steal do not imagine the people they're dealing with would steal from them. And so we have a whole political establishment which is willing to accept the face of the British establishment, the English establishment as it actually is, as it presents itself as honourable and democratic and just and all about fair play. And they believe it. And they believe it in the teeth of what their own senses, eyes and ears tell them they're dealing with. A state that has always worked the same way. I did a bit of extra research recently. In fact, I got an AI to give me a hand. But it came back with, and I checked a number of them, over 200 treaties that the British English state had entered into, which it then violated so that they were essentially void, but then held the treaty up, saying, but this is, you signed this. You gave us the authority to do this. It's absolutely how they play. It's simply a characteristic of that state, and always has been. So one of the things that we now know is that back in 1954, when the United Nations was getting the decolonization program underway, questions were asked about Scotland's status within the Union. And the response that was given was, it was suddenly discovered that it was really essential to have an inquiry into the relationship between Scotland and England in the Union. It's pure coincidence that United Nations had been formed in 1945 and that by 1950 it was getting into this, really running into getting ready to go into the decolonization program. It has nothing to do, of course, with the fact that questions were being asked about Scotland's relationship with England in the Union. And certainly nobody at home was asking those questions. But coincidentally, it was felt very important to investigate this relationship. After all, we haven't really looked at it, have we? We'll have a Royal Commission. Pure coincidence that that Royal Commission paints a picture of Scotland as an integral part of a unitary state. And that the first chapter includes this phrase that particular ministers should remember, quote, that Scotland is a nation and entered the union with England as a voluntary partner and not as a dependency. And that was put out in 1954. As you all know, everybody was tremendously concerned about whether Scotland was a dependency here in Scotland and England in 1954. Not. But the UN was. And so it's, with some checking, it is pretty clear that is what was produced in order to deflect the accusation or any investigation into Scotland's status as a potential dependency. That's the United Nations word for colony, or non-self-governing territory. How many people here have never heard a minister or prime minister or politician refer to Scotland as a voluntary partner in the Union? What does that actually mean, and why was it produced? What you will hear is people say, well, if we're a voluntary partner, why can't we leave? Well, how are we stuck? But that wasn't the purpose of the voluntary partner. And to understand the story, to understand the purpose of that story, you have to go back to the criteria for decolonisation, which is this absence of self-determination. And it is held, so there are 3 different criteria for a non-self-governing territory or dependency that show that this people, this distinct people, have been denied the right of self-determination. And then there are criteria for how that people has been actually allowed to exercise their fundamental right of self-determination. One of those conditions where you have exercised that right to self-determination is integration with a larger state, voluntary integration within a larger state. So fairly clearly, that definition of Scotland as a voluntary partner in the Union was pitched to meet that criterion that says that Scotland had already exercised its right of self-determination in 1707 when it voluntarily chose to enter a union. That union, says the narrative, created a brand new state. That union, and you will have heard, if anybody here listened to Dorothy Bain, the Scottish Lord Advocate in the Supreme Court in 2022, I think it was, describing the extinction of the former kingdoms of England and Scotland and the creation of this new state. That is the outcome of that, supposedly the outcome of this voluntary partnership. Why does that matter? It matters because this state that is supposed to have been created, which is a merger between the 2 former kingdoms, creating a new entity, a new state, operates a bit like 2 parents and a child. So the rights of the child, the state that is created, has to be voluntary, sit above the rights of the parent. The parents don't have the right to cut that child in half, either of them. It has an identity of its own. And that is what the English state, pretending to be a new state, United Kingdom, Great Britain, has absolutely relied on. And it is what the international community believes at the moment, that a kingdom of Scotland, a kingdom of England came together to create one single kingdom of Great Britain, United Kingdom of Great Britain, which has rights in international law and as a recognised lawful sovereign state, the rights of that state to integrity, to territorial, political and economic integrity, compete with the rights of a distinct people in a territory of that state in terms of which one is more fundamental. In fact, in practice, it is the rights of the state, because these rights help to ensure the peace and kind of continuity of the international community. It has been the rights of the state, the lawfully recognised state, that have always trumped those of a people who simply make up a territory within that state. That is why the UK English Supreme Court referred to the Quebec findings and to the British submission to on Kosovo. And I don't know if can't remember if they referred to Catalonia, but they're referring to Scotland as being equivalent to these. And they're making the point that Scotland is a territory within a unitary kingdom which has the rights of integrity of any sovereign state. And why does that matter? It matters because independence doesn't happen at home. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter if we successfully declare ourselves independent of Westminster and set up our own government. If we have torn apart, if we have unilaterally, UDI, torn apart a state and compromised the integrity of that state, which is a lawful sovereign state, any declaration of independence will be contested. And we, that is not, there are other examples of that. Kosovo, for instance, it's still contested. If it is perceived that we have left, that we have broken international law, we have not negotiated exit with the whole state of which we are part. And that was all set up. All of that was set up for us. If we have not done that correctly, if we have not followed international law, our declaration of independence, we will have plenty of countries that support it, but we will also have others, including the UK, that contest it and will go on contesting it. And that is a crippling situation for an independent state to be in. You can't enter certain treaties, you can't make international agreements, you have to go through third parties, you have to give all kinds of concessions to that third party to get arrangements within international treaties or agreements. It's really not a good position to be in, and it's not the position we want for Scotland. It is why, although they will not admit this, and I mourn the lack of courage here, it is why the leadership of the SNP will tell you that calling for UDI, calling for a de facto referendum is folly and madness and irresponsible and so on. But they won't tell you why it is. Because if they tell you why, you're left with this situation that you have to face. Currently, under international law, under the circumstances that apply for Scotland, any declaration of independence on the basis even of a democratic event would result in a contested sovereign state. So the only other route is Westminster Agreement. Hey, Section 30, which we all know is not going to be granted. So to come out and say, look guys, here's the situation right now, it's effectively to say we're stuffed. Excuse my language, but it really is. But keep voting for us because something will change if we just keep going, and maybe if we get to 70%, hey, then they'll have to. Really? Well, I don't know. We can go back to the Crusades. They haven't changed much since then, so shall we just expect them to suddenly start actually playing fair despite the evidence of our own? Oh, golly, that's a long history of perfidious Albion. Then what's the point? What is the point of a party? And it's not SNP or anything, but what is the point of any independence party if it admits that it cannot actually deliver? That they do not believe there is any way to deliver? That all there is persuading Westminster? Holding its feet to the fire? How? While they sell off Scotland and pipe our lifeblood down to England? How do we hold their feet? They'll have to. The Supreme Court said if we had a democratic vote, they'd have to. Right. And I last saw an elephant go past the window at 10 o'clock this morning, flying. So they can't. This is what I mean about cowardice. I believe that the leadership is afraid to come out and say to the people of Scotland, we can't. Not unless something drastic changes. And we don't know how to change it. We have to rely on the fact that they play fair. They're jolly decent. It's, stand up and play the game. Democracy, justice. And we'll sort it out over a glass of whiskey. Yeah. And another flying elephant. There's nothing concrete. And there's nothing concrete because of that situation. So here's what changes everything. The basis of the claim, and they don't want to hear this, too bad. The basis of the claim that the United Kingdom is a sovereign state with a lawful identity in international law and the right to defend the integrity of its borders and its political and economic reach is a partnership. They claim Scotland entered a partnership. I checked this with a former Supreme Court judge. That isn't a fudgy word that just means we're jolly good pals. It's a word with legal implications. A voluntary partnership means there's a partnership agreement. Think contract law. It is absolutely binding. There is a partnership agreement. What is the partnership agreement? The Partnership Agreement is the Treaty of Union. The Treaty of Union has one fundamental provision. It is there for one fundamental reason, and everything else follows from that fundamental reason. And that fundamental reason is the creation, you can go and read it if you don't believe me, of a single kingdom. One kingdom. I'll just wait till somebody's grabbed that. It's okay. Now, the ramifications of this go on and on and on. One kingdom requires one crown. A kingdom is the territorial jurisdiction of a crown and nothing more or less. A crown is a representative of the state. So for the state, that is the United Kingdom of Great Britain, to come into existence, there had to be a single crown. That crown then has territorial jurisdiction over this one kingdom. And that is what the treaty calls for. Then there is to be a parliament that represents that one kingdom. So if that one kingdom does not exist, then neither does the parliament. What happened was England had no intention whatever of abiding by the treaty, just like the other 200 we can point at. It got the treaty in order to do what it wanted to do, and then it did what it wanted to do, which was to create nothing, to continue exactly as it had always been with a change of name, and to add Scotland to the English crown, leaving the Scottish crown in place, which means one kingdom or two? Two. What does the treaty call for? So the treaty is not in effect. There is no partnership agreement. This new transformed kingdom that was formerly England and Scotland, that Bain and all these others, right back to Lord Cooper and back to, before that to Dicey, talk about, never came into existence. There is a treaty that says that's what we have, but there is what we actually have, which is Scotland annexed, an English parliament that has continued unchanged, an English constitution, and all the levers and mechanisms of the English state unaltered. As some of you heard Robert Black say, for England nothing changed. Scotland as a state was extinguished. Even our legal systems, overwritten by the English. None of the terms of the treaty were ever observed, ever followed. But the most important thing is that if there is no single kingdom, it never came into effect. And if it never came into effect, there is no partnership agreement. And if we were annexed instead, that is also called colonization. And that means that we can go to the international community and say, this is a lie. Scotland is a colony. Here is the treaty, here is the partnership agreement. Yes, there was a partnership agreement. And by the way, it was forced, like so many other English treaties. But it is not in effect. It never came into effect. Instead of this agreement, they did what they did to every other colony, and they annexed Scotland, and they followed that up with genocide and ethnic cleansing and plunder and deliberately starving the people of Scotland, as they did with every other colony. When that is acknowledged, and the evidence that we have is absolutely clear, it will be a political battle we will have to fight, and we are fighting it, and so far, with some success. But once that's recognised, Scotland then becomes listed as a non-self-governing territory. It means that we have not had our right to self-determination. Their flummery of a referendum, which did not meet international standards and was not a constitutional referendum nor binding, does not fulfil that. It broke all the rules. 70% in favour of no. The vow announced less than 2 days before 2 days before the vote, breaking the Purda agreement. People with no stake in the future of Scotland voting. It's simply not what you expect of an international referendum. It's rigged. That's a fudge, a fake, meant to tell the international community we've had our democracy, so we won't be wanting any more. But once you're listed, there is no limit, no time limit on when you may decide you do not want to be colonised anymore. More to the point, once we're listed, Westminster has no say. It's not Section 30. We don't need permission. They're not even allowed to interfere. in a democratic event. That's why what we're doing and why showing what the constitutional situation is so important, and not just the law, but de facto, all the signs that we are treated exactly like a colony that go with the fact that we are one. It means then it comes back home. Then we get to start the work. Then we can work towards a democratic event. Or, if we have already had a democratic event that we can hold up, we do the work to say, this is what the Scotland we are now going to put in place should look like. But we can do nothing until we get out from the situation where it appears that it's only with the consent of perfidious Albion that we would ever be allowed to get out of the lobster pot. And that's not going to happen. So that is why we're doing what we're doing internationally. And at home, it's time for us to think about restoration. What is it that's been taken from Scotland? What is it that has been erased? What is it that makes us Scots and not Finns or Danes or French or English? What makes us who we are? How do we put that back in place? What are the values that we hold dear and that we can see entrenched in a reborn Scotland? Let's not talk about a new Scotland, please. Scotland was established roughly 843 AD, 200 years before England. And we were a well-developed and internationally recognised state at the time of the Union, with treaties and a constitution and 3 parliaments and laws that went right back to 843 and put the common good right at the heart of those laws. So let's not talk about inventing a new nation, please. Let's talk about how we restore the Scotland that belongs to us, with its languages and its culture and its traditions and its values. So that's the work we have to do, and that we can start doing now and start fighting for those rights, while some of us try to clear that great big roadblock that is actually nothing but another British treaty lie. I'm going to stop, because I didn't mean to go on that long. I always do. I always go on far longer than I'm supposed to. But I guess that there's lots of questions and lots of things people would like to say, so I'm going to stop there and open up.
Anybody got any questions? Catherine.
Can I ask a question of habit? So if someone habitually uses a piece of land, for example, they can eventually claim it as their own. Could England not behave in that manner?
I don't think so, not if you look at international law and history. So England behaved habitually as the ruler of India. It held on, it habitually claimed rulership of Ireland for a damn sight longer than, excuse my French, than that. I'll tell you, we are dealing with perfidious Albion, so we have to remember, we have to be ready for questions like that. But basically, if you stole my house and dumped me on the other side of the world 100 years ago, and my granddaughter comes back and says, and I leave it, my will says this belongs to my daughter, and she leaves it to her daughter. She comes back to Scotland, makes her way back, and she says, that's my house. But my family's lived here for 100 years. Sorry, title belongs to the owner. Theft does not ever transfer into title. Now, where you're looking at common land or land that's open use land, particularly in Scotland, where the land is a common good asset of the Crown, although it's not Scots law that, strictly speaking, it's not Scots law that applies here, but that's a different matter where you don't have proprietary rights, so you have rights of access, and if people habitually, but you don't own it, you won't own that. You'll get access. You've got right of access. But theft, no, because theft does not transfer to title.
Doug?
Yeah, thanks very much for that talk. It was really enlightening, very interesting as well. The thing I'd like to ask of yourself, whereabouts are you now with actually getting the UN to actually recognise us as being a dependency, as a colony, and what's it going to take to push it all of the way? And are we going to succeed?
Okay, well,
Also, how do you get your support, finance and help to actually do this? Because you can't do it for free.
we're funded by our members and by the public, and we're looking at the balance now and thinking, oh boy, we better do another crowdfunder fairly soon, and ask people to do crowdfunders for us. So there's a lot of questions there. How long? How far are we? We're right at the beginning, but we have been really heartened and encouraged by the amount of support that we've come across. The case, so there are actually quite a number of territories and nations in the world right now that would qualify for listing as a non-self-governing territory, but they don't. We have the same, we can all show the same characteristics. What we have that is different is we have a coloniser saying we can prove Scotland's not a colony because it's a partner. And that's called a privative definition. There's a nice word for you. What it means is that it defines its opposite. That because we have been defined as not a colony because we are a partner, by that definition, the British state has established that if we are not a partner, then we are a dependency. And that gives us something that these other peoples who have been subject to colonisation do not have. So you find that the French government, in its imperial face, will argue back, and it'll pull all these tricks, argue back and forwards. But they had this referendum. But they did this. But they did that. And they can argue and argue and argue, and they do. But there's no specific legal defining characteristic, thing that you can say, there, that proves it. We actually do. It's unique. We have that. I think is one of the reasons that there was such consternation in the C24. What do we do about this? Because we're funded by the US and we're funded by the UK, and we don't like upsetting our funders. That's only by the way, that's only the civil service of the UN. That's not the actual members of the committee. In terms of, so we have that. It is political. We need to get to the point where we know that if it comes to that we can have that the C24 process where we can have the C24 refer us to C4 to authorise that we're either looked into or listed as an SGT. Craig Murray and Sharoff, as is of, have said what we are looking to have is at least at the next hearing is a hearing as they had for Puerto Rico this time on Scotland, where they're looking at that going, we have to look at this. And they're both fairly confident that that'll happen quickly. The rest of it depends on the politics. This is, you would hope it was just like a court case, that we could present our evidence to some court within the UN. The judge would say, found in favour of the... It doesn't happen like that. You have people refusing to recognise countries or territories when they really should be. If you look into the circumstances, for instance, of Hawaii, it will break your heart. It will break your heart. And they're still not listed because of the influence of the United States. But right now, things are in absolute turmoil. There are, it's tectonic plates shifting within the UN. And so there's a very good chance that those who would like to give perfidious Albion a bit of a bloody nose, given the way it's behaved recently, will see recognising Scotland's position for what it actually is as the chance to do that. And the behaviour of both of the US and of the UK as states means that there is less incentive for people not to do that. They have less to lose. So we're in a good position. I'm not a diplomat. I can tell you that Craig Murray would say, listen, it's not going to happen overnight, but he believes it is going to happen. He's been talking in terms of a couple of years. And that's him making sure he's not giving people false hope. So we are hopeful. We wouldn't be doing this unless we believe for sure that we can do this. and that it's our only route. So we just have to make up our minds. We're going to do this, and take as much of Scotland with us as we possibly can. Get everybody signed up. We're not political. We're never going to be a political party. We're never going to point at one party and say, "Oh, be gone, you evil, demons," or another and say you must support and vote for this one, because we're not political. We have members within Salvo and on the Liberation Committee who are senior, SNP elected representatives, councillors and conveners and members, and who are, we also have members of ALBA, we also have members of the ISP, and we have people who belong to no party at all. And everybody is the same. And nobody within our organisation points at one another and snarks and whatever. We look at how we can get whatever organisations we belong to on board with a non-political route to free Scotland from the chains that a lying state has wrapped around us to ensure that we can never move without their permission. And so we can go on being, having our blood piped down to the vampire blood bunk down in London down south without anybody being able to stop it. So we just all need to get behind the initiative to get Scotland free. And once we have done our job, and we have got us, to that point, yes, we're going to be involved in trying to make sure that Scotland is restored and that nobody puts the nail in the colonial coffin by saying, let's invent a new nation, and thus burying 1,200 years of a Scottish nation to pretend we're being born for the first time. So we'll work on that. But the job is really done once we've cleared that roadblock. And I'm really living for the day when that's where we are. Does that answer everything?
Yes, thanks very much for that. And there are a lot of us here that are exactly with you on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Derek.
Picking up Catherine and what Duke said. Catherine's talking about constant use of land, etc., creating a precedent. If they are constant, this is where my head hurts, you'll know why. If they're saying constantly that we are a voluntary partnership, then that phrase alone, because it's used all the time, should confine some of their arguments on the basis that as a partner, we should have the right to say, cheerio. But you're arguing about two parents and the rights of the child. We had this discussion.
Yes.
I just want to rehearse it again. The claim of rights should constrict, to a certain extent, the rights of the child. And how does that play in the bigger scheme?
Thank you. The claim of right, think of it this way. If the child is legitimate, now I hate the whole idea of it, how can a child not be legitimate, for God's sake? Really. However, let's go with that horrible definition of a legitimate and illegitimate child, okay? If the child is legitimate, then there is a legitimate marriage certificate showing the parentage, the contract. So a marriage certificate is nothing but a contract that you've signed. There's a legitimate contract there. Now, in the case of this particular marriage, there is a rider to that contract, a condition under which the marriage is valid. And the condition is the ratification of a 1706 Act securing the Presbyterian faith, which was actually done in order to ensure that the claim of right was in place, and the claim of right is the only named act within that, and that remains in place, as was noted by the English spy Daniel Defoe, who said that the claim of right continues in Scotland as to the limits of government and obedience. Government and obedience, by the way, is a constitution. So he didn't say the Scottish religion remains as it is under the claim of right. He said the Scottish constitution remains as under the claim of right. That is a condition. It's right there in the preamble to the treaty, which was hidden for a long time, by the way. And that preamble tells you, here is the condition of the marriage. What is it they call a prenup? So there's a prenup. That marriage is only valid with the claim of right in place. Claim of right, they never intended to actually get married. Somebody once said that the marriage isn't consummated. Well, there's no kid. You're right, because there's no child of that marriage actually, legitimate or otherwise, because that's just England. This picture of this. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to use that analogy. But dressed up, going, England going, I'm the child. My name is the United Kingdom of Great Britain. With its makeup like a dame in a pantomime. And the world has fallen for it. But then it never intended that the state of England from 1066 should be interrupted to be replaced by a new state, and it wasn't. And therefore, it hasn't implemented anything, including the condition. Why? Why? There was no marriage. There was no. It was never consummated. There was no child. There's just someone dressed up. And it's England dressed up as the child of the two parents. So if there were a child, yes, the legitimacy of that child and the marriage that produced it would hang on that prenup that is the claim of right, which is what I believed when I started. This prenup says Scotland has the claim of right and the people are sovereign. So you're right. Either way, whether there is a union or there is a pantomime dame calling itself the child of the merger, the claim of right applies. And the claim of right makes the people sovereign.
Mary?
Sarah, it was very refreshing to hear all the political parties understand will work together. Just a pity it doesn't happen on the ground. But the question I have to ask is the only people that live in Scotland that can sign the declaration?
No, you can sign it. So what we have what we call a diaspora. So you can sign it as that. I'm hoping Ivan has got this in place, but you can sign it as a Scot abroad or as a supporter. So, but we have a lot of problems with the website, and that, by the way, is not our fault.
Because my niece is Scottish, but she lives in New Zealand, and she's tried a few times. So I said I would ask the question from New Zealand.
It's not to stop. She's not being stopped because of where she's signing from. She's being stopped because we're being intercepted. And when we looked into it, and we've actually watched it happening, we can't do anything about it. And what it is that David Cameron brought in laws allowing interception of internet traffic, and that so they can hold it up, or they can, but they're not supposed to divert it. They're not supposed to set. But if you're allowed under the laws of looking after the security of the United Kingdom, and we are a threat to the security of England, calling itself the United Kingdom, the security of its hold on Scotland. So they talk about, this one kingdom and we're a threat to its security, but actually what they mean is, their blood bank. So they can interrupt and intercept internet and communication. And as soon as they've got your DNS, the thing that identifies you, they can put that in, and they can put a thing out to Google. They can put. That's why we told people to use, off-the-wall small browsers. They can put that intercept onto the main browsers. And what we having run a couple of experiments, what we reckon is we get about a third of the traffic of people getting through that should. We can't prove that because we can't force them to own up to the fact that they're doing it. And there's nothing, we can change it, we can come up with another DNS, but it'll just happen again. Maybe one of these days somebody brilliant will come up with a workaround for us. But in the meantime, we're kind of stuck with what we have. But what she could do is contact, say, the Secretary of Salvo direct, or once we have, if they contact direct, say even the website admin or the Salvo secretary, we can get them added. But it's why we are, we appear to be creeping up, and I don't believe that for 1 second. And I'm very sorry, but there is nothing we can do. We're up against the same, these same people, and they've always been the same.
Any other questions?
Yes. Are you getting any financial help and support from any of the independent parties? So although there's some within your body, they're not really, the parties themselves aren't
We're not at all popular with the leadership of, ISP being an exception, but with the leadership of any of the main parties. Or what I've come to think of as the independence industry. Because the message we're putting out is that, no, guys, it doesn't matter how great your policies are on the street. It doesn't matter what you convince people of. It doesn't matter what percentage of people say that they're in favour of independence. Because you're up against a state that you have no way of forcing to acknowledge Scotland as a partner and with any kinds of rights. As far as they're concerned, they know this fine. We swallowed Scotland. We catched Scotland, and now we must bind her fast. We swallowed you. You're part of England now. You're North Britain. You're a valued bit of England. You do not, for 1 second. We are in the fortunate position that we can fight peacefully. We can challenge peacefully. We can lobby and make our case. And the British state never imagined we would be able to do that. One of the things that Salvo and then Liberation came out of discussions at the SSRG, which 4 years ago, Jeff? About that. And we had extraordinary, passionate and illuminating debates about how do we go forward. And I used to cross swords regularly with an American professor called Paul McCartney, whom I have to tell you I like immensely, but we were like... And I remember on one occasion so talking about the constitutional question, and him saying, yes, but Scotland has no platform within the United Nations. Scotland cannot represent itself. It's represented by, the United Kingdom. And I said, well, there has to be some way of getting our position in front of the international community. And Paul kind of laughing went, well, you could always start a liberation movement. Oh, right. So we did. So that's, so far as we can see, we're not instead of the movement on the ground. We're not instead of the work that needs to be done to show people what we can have, what we can restore in Scotland. I get really passionate and excited about what we can have with the standing Scottish Constitution, even before you start addressing, modern amendments for the world we live in. The values in that, the common good, the right to the same justice for everybody, which means legal aid back, by the way, the right to independent justice, the right to protest, the right to privacy, oh my gosh, the rights that we have, and the right to hold a government to account to the point of sacking it if it breaks that contract with the people, I think is absolutely wonderful. And the chance to look at, well, how do we do that? What do they do in Switzerland? How do they do that direct democracy thing? How do they have these... What happens in schools to make sure that happens? What is the share that people have in the territorial resources, the benefits of oil and gas and renewables that every person is a shareholder in? How does that translate? Isn't that exciting? And also the obligation and the right to protect the environment that is part of it's called our inalienable patrimony. The right to protect that. All of this to me is really exciting, and it exists in what needs to be restored. And then all that we can bring to that for Scotland in the modern world, that starts once we get this lie out of the way. And that's when we all have to go to work. In the meantime, we need to fund and push forward the work of the bulldozer and the diplomatic ties and the friendships. And by the way, sorry, I do get a bit passionate about this, but a side benefit, or big side benefit of the diplomatic relationships that we're making is that, Scotland invented a thing called the trade embassy today, because Scotland had what are called trading colonies all across Europe, right to Russia, from Denmark all the way across. these were settlements of Scots that didn't want to take over. They weren't looking to say, this is, plant the flag of Scotland and say, now you belong to us. They wanted to trade. They wanted to live there. And these are called colonies. They just mean settlements out there. But what happened was, and we were the most successful trading nation in Europe for a long time, by the way. And then our trade was dismantled because it was a threat and a rival to England. And we had no national debt because we traded instead of making wars. The other thing was that they could, so let's say there's a very, very tricky diplomatic negotiation going on. Well, some very senior member of, say, the Dutch government might come down to the trading colony to discuss the price of tulip bulbs and what they would be exchanged for. And in the back room, while that's going on, a discussion of this coming war or this potential treaty would go on out of the public eye. That's how trade embassies began. And by the way, it's why Scotland was so welcome, and Scots are so welcome across Europe. People may not remember why, but that's why. That's why. So what's happening now is that our embassy to the United Nations, and in New York and then next month in Geneva, is starting to reestablish that wonderful set of relationships between Scotland and the rest of the international community. That's a huge plus. So I think that's something for us to be really excited about, because that's happening now. Whatever else happens, Scotland is starting to be perceived and recognised and remembered in the international community. Have I gone off the question? Do I need to come back to the...
Sarah, can I ask a question?
No.
I would like to know, as chair of Yes Grassroots Oban, or co-chair, sorry, of Yes Grassroots Oban, what can we, as a local Yes group, do to support the work of Salvo?
Well, both. So it's Salvo Liberation. Salvo is working on the ground here to restore the rights of the people. So what Salvo is doing is actually supporting the international case. What we want to see are as many campaigns as possible on the ground that assert the unique constitutional identity of Scotland. Things like the common good rights, common good lands, the territorial sovereignty of the Scots. Right. Have I time to tell you a wee story?
You've all the time in the world.
Don't tell me that. We'll be sitting here when the sun's gone down. Right. So in 1982 or 83, a group in Galloway, and I think they were called Scram, anyway, got together to prevent the dumping of nuclear waste in the I can never pronounce it, Racher Hills in Galloway. Thank you, Mulwacher. Thank you. And they fought, and their lawyer was a certain Willie McCrae. And ultimately, you had the Atomic Energy Authority, the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and the Department of Defence lined up against this group of activists, not even as many people as are here in this room, who were, talk about David and Goliath. And they went all the way down to hearings in Westminster, for which I have not been able to get the transcripts. They're really hard to get, but they backed off. Scram won with Willie McCrae as their lawyer. A little while later, Strathclyde region held an opinion poll, a referendum, absolutely non-binding, on water privatisation. And that referendum came back saying that the people of that region did not want their water privatised. And it was not privatised. Okay, Thatcher's in charge of this privatisation at this point. It's taking place all the way, everything she can privatise, anything that moves she privatises, right? But a referendum held by a local authority, which has no, constitutional legal force under the pretended legal system of the UK, stops it. What's going on here? Then we come to the fracking question. The licences for fracking Scotland had already been applied for and agreed. And they had a public consultation. And the public, the Scottish public, overwhelmingly came back and said no. And the British government backed off. They backed off. Even, what's the name of that Ineos guy, whose name I forget because it's a Freudian slip, I can't stand it. Thank you.
Sorry.
How come? Why on earth would they back off dumping nuclear waste? UKAEA and DOD backed off. Thatcher's privatisation baby. That's the reason we don't have privatised water in Scotland today. Or fracking, with the licences already ready to be handed out. Any guesses, anyone, why this government that does exactly what it wants, including aiding and abetting, fact, helping to carry out a genocide, why would it back off doing what it wanted with Scottish resources? The clue was in the first part of what I was talking about. Say that again? Sovereignty. Title. Title to Scotland's territorial and maritime resources resides in the Scottish Crown, which, although it is dormant, still exists. And therefore, Scotland's assets have to be administered. Golly, that's the word for a colonising power. Scotland's resources have to be administered under the English Crown. They don't belong to it. Even if they pass laws that say that they're vested in the monarch, they have to be administered. So my theory is, so they backed off all of those. And so to me, the logic is very simple. If that had gone to court, if they had challenged and said, we're doing this anyway, when there was really fierce public opposition, it would have gone to court. And at some point in court, the fact that two crowns still exist, and that title resides in the Scottish Crown, and this, when you take what belongs to someone else, it's called territorial alienation. It's the Scottish, we're talking here about sovereignty. Something very, very, taken very seriously in international law is sovereignty. So we have territorial sovereignty, and that sovereignty is being alienated by the English-British state. They didn't want that coming out. We do want it coming out. There's lots of ways that it could come out. Challenges to pylons, to another wind farm, to a battery storage unit, to rights of way that come under public ownership, to common good land that's being taken by a council that doesn't understand it has no right to touch the damn land. It belongs to the community. There are umpteen challenges that can be mounted in local court, in the local sheriff court, and followed up. And the process of doing that means you have to educate a lawyer. They have to learn about this. Now you've got an educated lawyer. Now you have this brought in. So I discussed this with Robert Black, KC, who suggested this is exactly the way to go. And he said, you start in the lowest possible level in the sheriff court and then take it forward. Take it forward, gather momentum, take it further. At some point, he said, they will come and, so it doesn't matter who you're taking to, whether it's a proposed consortium for an SEZ or a council or whoever it is you're challenging, or an energy company or whatever it might be, you challenge at the lowest level. But at some point, he said, they will offer you a settlement so that this doesn't get any bigger. And what you do then is you say, absolutely, we'll take it as long as you publicly acknowledge that the reason that you have backed off is that title is still vested in the Scottish Crown and in the community of the realm, and that this was an unlawful thing. And he said they've never dared do that. So here's something you can think about. Getting active. If you don't believe you could make any difference, then I will remind you of another part of the conversation where, as Paul McCartney says to me, well, you could always start a liberation movement. Here we are. You can do anything. Take it on, decide you're going to do it, say it's just you, and then see how many other people are saying, well, it's just me, and then it's just us. And every single challenge that you make under the Scottish Constitution, under the sovereignty of the Scottish people, under the rights that are enshrined in the claim of right, for instance, as a condition of the union that never happened, and which is there, therefore, whether it's there or not, that's the basis. It's the basis of Scots common law. That sovereignty being asserted all over Scotland, it's like somebody who has been, you know, those movies where the boxer is down and out, and the big bully is celebrating his win, and there he is. That's when we get up, and the music starts, and the wee guy gets up, and he lands his punch, and the bully is sent flying out of the ring. That is what us standing up, area by area, group by group, actually is. Meanwhile, we are really kind of going to run out of money with Liberation Scotland fairly soon. So anything that you can do, and I don't just mean personal donations, but to get other people to see, to understand, and to help us fund, just to the point, all we're looking for is enough to get to the point where we have that listing, where Scotland is recognised, and we can breathe and go, okay, Scots, it's down to you now. We come home and we go, right, come on. Now it comes home. But we have to get there. So anything you can do to help us raise funds, we will be, it's for all of us. It's not for us. By the way, we don't pay any salaries. We've just brought in a consultant on social media, not very much money, who doesn't belong to the organisation. It's not we're paying any of our own. We just needed some expert advice, like we do with an accountant or our lawyer from time to time. So that's the only expenditure we have over and above putting on the events or getting out to the UN or whatever we need to set up, and paying the other consultant we pay, of course, is our NGO JPTI, and that's a donation we give them every month in order for them to take us. They are our advocates at the United Nations. But none of us get a penny, nor would we expect to get a penny, nor do we look for that. We're not going. I can think of quite a lot of what I call the indie industry, where people are pulling in money and that keeps them going. We don't have any of that. So you can help us to raise money, you can contribute whatever, knowing that not one of us is grifting. And that's across my heart. That's a promise.
I'm not properly understanding what makes us a sovereign nation. Like you've just been explaining about how the British government or UK government backed down to do with those issues, to do with land.
All right, so...
And can I just ask, does the sea count on that?
Yes. So we're not a sovereign state. We're not even a sovereign nation because we're annexed. But we are a sovereign territorial nation. And we have been studied by scholars, international scholars, for the peculiarity of our position by which we are stateless and yet territorially sovereign. The reason we are territorially sovereign is that a kingdom is the territorial jurisdiction, which means its law applies and its control applies, of a crown. And it includes the sea, and I think up to 200 feet above into the sky and so many feet into the ground. That is the jurisdiction of a crown. Because the Scottish crown was not extinguished, and that is because a new crown that was a combined crown never came into existence, right? We were added, the English coronation oath was extended to Scotland. Scotland was added to the English crown, and they called that the British crown. But it's just the English crown, same one from 1066, with its territorial jurisdiction. The Scottish crown wasn't abolished. There was no way of abolishing it. So it just remained, but with no monarch. That's why no English monarch has taken the Scottish coronation oath. They don't want to draw attention to the fact that actually this is a big fudge and there's two crowns. But they do have to administer Scotland because their crown doesn't have a right to it. Ours has title. And that title is sovereign title. Absolute authority, territorially. belongs to the Crown. And by the way, the Crown of Scotland is the community of the realm and not the monarch. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to know a bit more, again, detail about that, how it might work in practice.
Well, it has never been challenged because what has happened is you put a big tablecloth on the elephant and you say, that's our dining table, by the way, let's all carry on. We all know we're British, don't we? And it's the British crown, and watch the British coronation, and the fact that it's all completely English is beside the point, because the treaty says it's British.
But you're saying that you think the British or UK government back down on these things like the fracking because this would come out?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so you're saying if court cases were taken that are basically defending the right to the land or the sea, Scottish people to decide what happens in it or something like that.
It's where you have where you do not have permission of the owners. So title is ownership, okay? So if you are bringing in let's say you're bringing in a massive battery storage area and the people in the local area, or Flamingo Land, but the people say, we don't want it. Well, tough, you're getting it. No, hang on. Title is vested in the community of the realm. They do not have title. They cannot assign title. And the Scottish Government, as they call it, which is actually the Scottish Executive Administration of Westminster, cannot say that they can represent the people of Scotland and their sovereignty when they are already sworn to and appointed to represent the sovereignty of Westminster. They don't have that authority. You can only represent one sovereignty, right? Therefore, it's time to begin challenging this, time to pull it. And we're not going to win every time, but we start doing it and doing it and doing it and bringing it out.
So just out of interest, just a thing that I'm slightly involved in, if a company is making a representation to the Scottish Government because something they don't like is happening, that representation is in effect to the administrative body of the UK. It's not actually acting on behalf of the people of Scotland.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is absolutely correct. And it's time that we made use of that.
So if I, which I do, possibly have the possibility to make a representation at the appeal,
Yeah.
I'm curious about whether there might be a way to
There will be.
wriggle that in.
Well, you will, but they'll ignore you.
Okay. I could still say it.
You can say it, but they'll just hope you go away and nobody picks up on it.
The last monarch to take the Scottish oath was Queen Anne.
Yeah.
King Charles, in part of the events that were part of his general coronation, had this signing where the pen didn't work,
Yeah.
which was to recognise the authority of the Church of Scotland,
That's right.
which was part of the Claim of Rights. So what I'm
Nope,
asking,
it's not.
isn't it?
Nope. It's part of the 1706 Act for the Security of the Presbyterian Faith. And it takes text from that and applies it as if that met the requirements in law of a monarch in Scotland. And it doesn't.
Right. So what happens if there's a campaign for King Charles to take the Scottish oath?
Well, I've had one sitting on...
Does that mean that the structures of Scottish government that supported the Scottish Crown have to be in place as well?
I love that question. What it means is that, as far as I can tell, so we're now into really uncharted territory, and we have to be really careful, because most of our legal establishment, including those of very good faith, have simply swallowed that is a dining table with a tablecloth over it, not an elephant. That's how they were trained, that's how they see it, that's how they know the law, and it's not possible that they've been walking past an elephant all this time. You know, Robert Black is the first to actually pull the tablecloth off and go, holy, that's an elephant. So what we do now has to be really carefully worked out and approached. We have to be absolutely certain. You're right, so there is a Scottish crown, there is an English crown, there is no British crown. That has never come into existence. What does that mean about the Scottish state? Well, the crown represents the state. Therefore, the Scottish state is still in place but dormant in the same way that the Scottish Crown is in place. It still has title, but it's dormant. So what else is still in place but dormant? Well, at least in theory. Let's look at the Parliament. So if the Parliament in Westminster is the English Parliament that continued without change, and I think Robert Black has established that very well, what that means is that the Parliament to represent this single kingdom has never come into existence, and that English Parliament is populated with Scots MPs who sit there to be laughed at, as Defoe said, not as part of the UK Parliament, but as Scots, representatives of Scotland within an English Parliament. That changes a lot. That changes a great deal. It opens up this possibility of, well, what would happen, if they also sat in a Parliament in waiting. What would happen? All of these things can be looked at, worked out. What else remains in place? Oh, bloody hell! Sorry, guys.
Think there, who's not turned their phone off?
I'm sorry. So there are lots of things open up. But the rights of the people of Scotland, some of which go back a very long way, start to come back to life, because that English Parliament had absolutely no right to extinguish Scots laws. It has no authority to do that, because we have no agreement by which we can make the laws the same in England and Scotland, because England wants to control Scotland.
Didn't the Claim of Rights also say you don't get our resources, you cannot make a decision, you cannot take our resources?
Implicitly, because what the Claim of Rights says, so this is where it all gets, where your head starts to explode. So, mine exploded for a long time. So let me see if I can do this so that your heads don't explode. Under the Claim of Right, the Scottish Crown, any lawful monarch has to take the Scottish coronation oath and an oath of accession, which includes the Claim of Right. They have to also take an oath to uphold the Claim of Right, which is nothing, not just religious. It's it's constitutional. So the oath that the monarch is obliged to take makes the Scottish Crown different from almost any other. Because before the people take an oath as lieges to their monarch, that monarch has taken an oath to the people. The rights, rents and privileges of the Scottish Crown I will defend, uphold and never, I promise never to transfer or alienate, undermine. Now, you don't have to take an oath to yourself. In England, the monarch is the Crown. So our Scottish monarchs had to take an oath to the Crown, and that's because the Crown is the community of the realm. So before people took an oath to that monarch, the monarch had taken an oath, prior oath to the people, sits above that. So what follows from that is that the Crown, when we talk about the Crown being, so the Crown is sovereign. That's where you get your popular sovereignty, because you're the Crown. That's where it comes from. That's the legal mechanism that makes you sovereign. And that Crown's territorial jurisdiction is yours. The Crown has title to the Scottish territories, maritime and land, the major regalia of the Crown, also known as common good assets, just as it has judicial sovereignty and political sovereignty. So it is in the Claim of Rights insistence that James is being deposed because he failed to take the Scottish oath that is required of any lawful monarch. It upholds the Crown and the oath to the Crown that absolutely enshrines the sovereignty of the people of Scotland as the Crown, because that's who we are.
So
right?
that's the binder, that's the treaty of the two parents.
Yes.
It's been broken.
Yes.
Therefore, the relationship between the parents and the child has also been broken.
Yes. So we have two, if you like, we have two roots at this. We have the fact that just binned the treaty, the whole thing. Stuck it in the bin and said, we don't need a joint kingdom, we'll just eat Scotland. And also, oh no, we have it. No, you don't have this marriage, because there's your condition. And where is it? So yeah, we have it both ways. We just have to make it clear.
If there is the Scottish Crown, can we just pick someone to be the monarch?
No.
Actually, that works, yeah.
But why not? If
Okay, so it's Scotland elected up until Malcolm the Third. Scotland used the election system, which was people were they were both eligible to become king or queen, and they were so the old system was called the system of tanistry. So they were qualified heirs who might be considered the best one. And the point about the Crown of Scotland is that it was there to defend the realm of Scotland. It was there to unite the clans and the peoples of Scotland so that we could stand against a common enemy and survive. And so that was the purpose and the point of the Crown, to defend the community of the realm. And those who were best suited to do that and came from particular families that did that were called Tanish, or heirs, means heir to the fire. And that was changed, and then it would be decided. You know, it wasn't automatic. It wasn't you were king, so your son became king or your daughter became queen. There was an election process that went on. Now that changed in about the 1100s, and that's not my period, so I can't tell you very much about it. Just that it changed, and that it was negotiated that they would be allowed to apply that English. The descent by, of heirs in line of descent. And there's a name for that, and I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, that's when that changed. But by the time of Bruce, they went back. And so you find the declaration of the clergy and the people saying that Bruce is made king by the knowledge and consent of the common folk of Scotland. Common folk and people of Scotland. And so it's this notion that the nation itself decides. Now, we don't have a lawful, Charles is not lawful monarch of Scots, no matter what they tell you. And they'll bluster and sputter, and even our allies will do that. Rubbish. No, it's not. He absolutely is not. But who is?
No one.
So we, if we were to have another monarch, it would have to be by the election, according to the declaration of the clergy and the people, it would have to be by the knowledge and consent of the people of Scotland. So you'd have to ask the whole country. And I suspect that most of the country would say, well, we may still have a crown, but we don't really want another king or queen, do we?
Yes? Sorry, I don't really.
Now you're talking about the crown and the sovereignty, right? What would happen if Scotland became a republic? What would the definition of sovereignty be in that scenario?
If we became a republic without enshrining the sovereignty of the people that comes from the crown within the constitution, we would lose our sovereignty. And I don't want to see that happen.
Catherine, I think this is an easier question. But Westminster must be watching at the moment what yourselves are doing and what the level of people looking for independence are. Must be also watching it in Wales at the moment because it's rising in Wales. I know that Ireland is a different situation. The unification of Ireland's written into the Good Friday Agreement of referendum.
Although Keir Starmer has said that he's not going to honour that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
But do you think what's going on in these other countries is going to be any effect on the people you are working to in the United Nations?
I think it's difficult to say. Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to predict how much effect that will have. I think it's one of the things that we can say is that the more unpopular, in fact, let's face it, the more loathed Keir Starmer is internationally, and his ally, Donald Trump, becomes internationally, the more the global South and the BRICS countries are going to be interested in saying, okay, let's give Scotland the recognition that it deserves. And the great thing about it is that when it comes to listing for decolonisation, the accused, the coloniser, can't at the Security Council can't block it.
Any more questions? Not from you, Dave.
No, it's a publicity thing. Hands up those people here who are members of Sally.
Wow.
Can I suggest that those who join, sign up?
Good idea.
I got a quick chat,
Yeah.
Sally, about your talk there. How,
They've been there for quite some time.
That's all right.
sorry, I was just about your talk there. I could
Did you
hear
enjoy
that
it, Stuart?
bit. You could hear that. I gave you a copy.
Yeah.
I got a question to ask you.
Sure, go ahead.
It was copy. Better that, can we got our photo taken?
Well, I think on that note, we should maybe just wind things up. But I want to thank Sarah for her huge long journey and coming up here just to talk to us, because we're special.
You are, of course you are.
I'd
Thank you.
also like to thank Independence Live for filming
Thank you.
us. Or filming Sarah. I keep wanting to call you Sally now. It's your fault, Stuart.
My favourite university lecturer used to call me Sally.
Or would have been worse if it had been Sally or Salvo?
Well, he said, oh my gosh, think about that. But he used to say, John McInnes, he wrote the Duchess. He used to say that there's no Gaelic named Sarah, so I had to be a Vorag or I had to be Sally. And so he would call me one or the other depending on his mood.
I would like to say as well, for anyone that hasn't yet signed the Declaration of the Sovereign Scots, the blank declarations are up at the back. This is Mike Fenwick's campaign, and it kind of balances what you're doing.
It complements it, yeah.
If we are sovereign Scots, that's great. There's going to be 100,000 signatures handed into the UN, and if we're not sovereign, then we must be a colony. So, if you haven't yet signed it, please do. What else did I have to say? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.